Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. Puddles and I are in St. Louis, Missouri, at the home of Timothy Myers, who's invited us in to come talk about Mr. Jacobs. 1983, you came to St. Louis Symphony, and
That's right.
in 1997, you were appointed principal trombone
That's right.
of the St. Louis Symphony. Obviously, your main teacher was Mr. Crisafulli, but you also had several lessons with Mr. Jacobs.
I did.
Do you recall your first experience with Mr. Jacobs?
I do. I had a tuba playing friend who really encouraged me to get a lesson with him, and this was at the end of my freshman year. So of course I had no idea what to expect, and I remember most how he was interested in getting me to move the upper part of my body when I took a breath. So I had never heard anything like that before, and oddly enough, that first lesson was the last lesson until after I came to St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
When I thought at that point that I really needed to address some issues in my playing, so I started going up to Chicago. So I could have done it easily when I was there, but I never did. So
Well, it's a nice drive. Maybe not so nice, but do you remember what were some of those issues that might have drawn you back to Jake's studio?
Well, I think a lot of it may have had to do with the fact that I'm asthmatic, and the symptoms got worse, I think, when I came to St. Louis. I think that was part of it. I had lots of tensions in my playing, and I guess when it came right down to it, I didn't really have a good sense of the mechanics of breathing.
I see.
So I went back to him a number of times over several years, and he was always very helpful to me. I remember my next lesson, which would have been 84 or 85 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he was talking about an entirely different aspect. I was allowing my chest to rise, for instance, but he was pointing out that I was really stiff in the abdomen area. Well, I don't know where that came from, but it must have been a habit or set of habits, I suppose, that built up over a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always astonished at what he was able to do in a lesson. What I thought I couldn't do, and then suddenly I was doing it, which really was astonishing to me. That's all.
So you would go in playing at one level, and then by the end of the lesson, or maybe even fairly shortly into the lesson, you'd be elevated pretty dramatically.
Yeah, that happened a number of times. Also, though, they were information-laden lessons, just information that I just wasn't familiar with. And so I was probably not the greatest student when I was a student. I became a better student after I left school. I sat down in the coffee shop downstairs writing out, gosh, what did he say? What ought I to do when I go back? What should I practice? And and I worked hard at that stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like from your initial lesson, there was less flow and more tension. Was he talking about that in terms of trying to do the bellows,
right?
The bellows activity.
Yes. He wanted to see more movement, but more airflow.
Yeah.
And I wasn't giving the instrument what I had the capacity to give it.
And so, as a result of him getting you to have more larger inhalation, resulting in the, I guess, what you would call a sternal movement. Did you feel like you had more ease or relaxation, or what was that? Do you remember what that was? What was that like?
Yeah, I would say both ease and relaxation, both. I did experience a lot of let's just say success that just came from giving the instrument the air that it needed,
Right.
giving my lips the air that they needed.
Right. So less pressure, more flow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And how did that? What did that look like or sound like? Not look like, but sound like with your trombone playing. How did that increased airflow manifest itself in your playing?
Well, eventually, I think it became just a freer sound. I do remember some instances where some folks were suggesting that I was just kind of forcing, and so it absolutely had the effect of freeing up the sound, opening up the sound.
And that's probably, I would imagine, that's one of the things that kept you coming back, was just
Right.
to recapture that.
That's right. That's right. I did often have this experience in lessons. I'm astonished that I can do it, and then I would kind of come home and, now how did I do that? And feel like whatever I was capable of doing was only because Mr. Jacobs was there. And so I would go back, and I think that there is a degree of truth for me to say that I needed to go to him to play well. Of course, I wasn't right there. I had a family with, a little kid and busy job, and
Yeah.
so that led to some puzzlement. Like, what should I? How am I going to get through this?
Right. But obviously, you were playing at a very high level.
Yeah, I think I still was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with Mr. Jacobs, it certainly was, in my experience anyway, similar that during the lesson, he'd really get one dramatically increased in their level of performing, and you just, as the week went on, that would decline, and then you go back for another one. It was sort of this stair step effect. I don't know if that's something that you.
Well, yeah, that rings a bell. Although the other thing is that you studied with him weekly, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
and I was every few months or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
I just wondered if there was a difference in quality between the kinds of lessons somebody who was there every week versus someone who. Well, I was already a professional, and I didn't need help with playing rhythms, and I didn't
Right.
need help with that kind of stuff. What the difference in quality of lessons? So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
I think the weekly lessons were maybe just a little bit different, only because of just hearing that material every week. I don't know that necessarily it was because when I would then, after I graduated and I left for the Savannah Symphony, I would come back several times a year, and from Savannah, and drive up, and it was similar material, but just it wasn't every week.
yeah.
So maybe that's what you experienced, just that.
I think that's right. The other thing that I still remain curious about, and I'm not sure I'll ever get an answer to it, is that I have heard Mr. Jacobs in lectures talk about how to be able to get students to put these concepts into practice without even ever being aware of, for instance, what they're doing with their bodies and
Right.
stuff like that. On the other hand, my experience was almost hyper focused on that kind of stuff. I mean, certainly moving air, but I had all the airbags and the ping pong ball thing. I was using all that stuff, and it's all very helpful. But there was a place where I thought, I'm kind of dependent on that all these gizmos to move the air, and I also sort of feel like maybe I'm dependent on him. Well, I can't be. I'm in St. Louis. It's not that far away, but I'm here, and I'm in the middle of it.
Right.
So I decided at one point to make. Decided to not go to see him for a while, and it turned out that at that point, then I didn't see him anymore, and then he was no longer with us.
Right.
So I think that over the years I did internalize these things by saying those messages and other slightly different messages that I came up with to myself to direct myself. What do I need to do? Because of course that's what a teacher is doing. A teacher is trying to teach a student how to be their own teacher.
Right. Exactly.
And may sound surprising, but people who are already making their livings doing something sometimes still need to do that, and I did.
Well, I mean, it seems like it obviously worked out well for you.
Yeah,
So
I would say
yeah,
it's worked out pretty well. Yeah.
It's, did you remember, was that particularly when you made that decision consciously to just maybe not go back as often, and then of course he passed away? Was that a sense of freedom for you? I mean, was there,
I
was
wouldn't
there a time
say
of withdrawal?
Yeah.
Speaking of independency language, was there a time of withdrawal, or?
I wouldn't say it was a sense of freedom. No, it was just a sense that it was. I was redirecting myself on a path of, well, now I really do have to figure this out myself, and when I encounter the problems, I need to become my own teacher.
Yeah.
So, no, I wouldn't say freedom. I would just say those messages were profound messages, and somehow I needed still to internalize them.
I have to say that when he passed away, I had a similar mental shift because I thought to myself, well, now I have to do this.
Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's interesting to hear you say that, and I think that was one of the things that was attractive to me in our discussions prior to me coming to St. Louis, was just to find out more about that. So, what about your time with Mr. Crisafulli? I mean, what a great gentleman, and was there any crossover in the information between Jacobs and Mr. Crisafulli?
Well, I wouldn't say there was crossover in the way it was presented.
Yeah.
When I came to Northwestern in '75, I was really just a euphonium player. And I had a little Bundy trombone that I thought, well, I would play around with this and maybe I could get into the jazz band, and I started sort of teaching myself.
Yeah.
I had maybe an odd expectation. I was going to a pretty high-powered school and studying with a teacher who was member of the high-powered brass section.
Yeah.
And I figured that the kind of teaching I needed was somebody who was gonna,
Right hurt on you.
And I that's not what I got. I got repetition I don't know, one way to describe them is gentle concepts, you know. But I thought I wasn't learning anything, and I thought, he's not teaching me anything. This is as a freshman, and it was about the middle of the next year where suddenly the light bulb went on, and I thought, wow, you know, the subtlety of this, what he's doing, that's really huge.
Oh.
So, I mean, I was ready to transfer to a different school, and you know, so I don't know if anything in my playing changed at that point, but it took some time because, you know, I thought, you know, I'm in fight mode. You know, I'm gonna, you know, practice my way to the top, and yeah, of course that's what you do. But I had a completely different expectation than what I encountered. So he was extremely generous to me in so many ways, and you've probably heard stories of lessons at his house, and then him saying, "Dorothy, set another place for this young man," and I'd have dinner with him, and
countless times. Yeah.
You know, I would say, "Okay, well, I'm going to go take this audition," and he would say, "Do you have enough money?" And he'd reach in his wallet and just he didn't even count it, just hand me some money, which I kept track of, and I paid him back eventually when I could, which was not till I got in St. Louis. And he'd forgotten about it, of course. I mean, if I were playing with the orchestra, he would say, "Well, do you need a ride?" So I'd get a ride in the carpool. But just I think if I were to describe kind of a meta message from Frank Crisafulli, it was, this is how to live with your instrument. You know, it's not, there's lots of work, but the approach with yourself has to be kind of a gentle approach, and insistent, but, well, persistent is probably the better word, but, you know, gentle reminders to yourself, because that's what he gave his students. Now, I said in other lessons he often had an open door policy sometimes, and people would sit in on my lessons, and, you know, everybody got kind of what they needed, but the overall message was generosity.
That sounds familiar. Yeah. I had the opportunity to sit in on a couple of lessons because of that open door policy, and I just remember the whole demeanor in the studio during the lessons was very positive and uplifting, and not one of riding herd and saying no, but
I would play something, and he would invariably say, "Very good," and even if I didn't think so, and the only time he was stern with me, that was exactly once. And I played something, I have no idea what it was at this point. He said, "Very good," and I said, "Oh, I don't think it was very good." And he said, "Now look here, young man, I am the one who decides if it's good or not." Okay.
My students remember that. I tell you the same thing. That's great. And another thing that I noticed in that lesson, a couple lessons observing with Mr. Crisafulli, and then my own lessons with Jake, whenever Jake would play in the lesson, was this whole idea of projection and stage makeup, because the sound up close was so much different than the sound out in the hall. And you know, we're used to listening to recordings where the tuba anyway was very beautiful, velvety, and this sort of thing. And so, but that's not the sound that I would hear up close.
Right.
And I'm sure you probably
I
encountered that too.
Exactly so. And you know, but the sound, I don't think my sound is like Frank Crisafulli's really, but I heard it at least once a week,
Yeah.
often more than that, up close and, you know, at Orchestra Hall. After I'd been in St. Louis, I think the last time I heard him in Orchestra Hall, I was sitting up in the balcony, and there was a new piece on the program, a piece the orchestra hadn't played, and I can't remember. It's something to do with orange. That's all I remember.
Three Oranges, or
no,
it was a new piece.
It was a new piece, and the composer had written lots of pieces with colors in their names.
Oh, right, yeah.
I don't remember the composer's name.
So
I'm there early, and the stage is pretty much empty, and Mr. Crisafulli is not playing cards as usual, but he's on stage practicing the part. And it just hit me. You know, I could hear him very clearly. It just hit me, and I said, "Wow, that is the sound in my head." I just heard. I told him later. He kind of brushed it off, you know, like, "Oh," but it was really pretty remarkable. I heard it, and I thought, "Wow, that's the sound in my head."
That's neat. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, you know, just getting back to Jake a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So working with just getting you to use more air. What about the mental or psychological aspects? Do you recall anything from in terms of putting your focus? Did he work with you on that? Did he have you buzzing? Do you remember any of that?
Oh, I would be buzzing often in lessons, and you know, it was information, how, you know, take the air in with the devices, the gizmos that he had in the studio, and then now forget all that and, you know, sing a song with your instrument.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it was almost a little tension there, you know, because it was so compressed. I was there for one lesson, and I might not see him for a few more months, you know, and so here's the information. Look what you just did. You were able to move air. You're able to move your body. Now, sing the song.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But I think that ultimately was the message. Was just make these guys your vocal cords and sing the song.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think, you know, he was certainly aware. I think, especially as he progressed through the 80s and into the 90s, with the availability of some on a cheaper level that we students could purchase the gizmos, you know, the breathing bags and the spirometers and the breath builders and blah blah blah
right.
blah blah. That we started to get these things, and so we could become hyper focused.
Yeah.
On them. I think he started to sense that we were not forgetting about that, and we were starting to place a lot of attention on that. And so I think later in the 90s he started to he wouldn't stop using them if he felt like you needed them, but I think he was really working hard to make sure that you were forgetting about it and really focusing on the song.
Yeah. I know that I felt for a period really attached to all those devices. I hardly ever use them now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you can take in a great breath and let it out. Tim, there must have been some opportunities for you to play with the Chicago Symphony.
Yeah. Well, the first one was in '79, I think it was. They needed a euphonium player to play the euphonium part in the Michael Tippett Fourth Symphony. So it's a pretty active part, actually, and prepare the part. Of course, there's no recording. You've got your part. That's all you've got.
Yeah.
and go there and just do it, And I'm sitting Arnold Jacobs is sitting here, and they're working, and Ed Kleinhammer is sitting here, and there's my teacher, and Frank Crisafulli, and wow, that was just kind of unreal.
Do you remember anything? Were there any visceral moments? I mean, you were probably really focused on what you were trying to do and accomplish, but do you have any memories of what he was doing over there and what Kleinhammer
I'd heard the orchestra from the audience, and I had an impression of what that was, but then sitting there, you get a sense of really what kind of sound they're making, what kind of focus there was there.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty amazing. And I'm just hoping I'm doing my job, hoping I'm keeping up.
And that was with Schulte, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, and you probably, did you ever sit maybe assistant principal next to Mr. Herseth?
I did. The one that really, well, there's a couple. How can they all not stick in your head? But I remember a Bruckner 5.
Oh, wow. Was that the one for the Pope?
Well, yes. It was played in Orchestra Hall. They did all their shows there. And I was sitting beside Bud Herseth and just amazed at the sound.
Yeah.
Then later, several months later, that was when Pope John Paul was coming through Chicago, and I think it was at Holy Name Cathedral.
Yeah.
They set up the orchestra, and we played the first 2 movements of the Bruckner, and the crowd's security. Wow.
Yeah.
And then there's a pause after the second movement, and then here comes the Pope, and and then the pews are laid out in a cross, right? And so they had set his, I don't know if they call it the throne. It looked like a throne. Here he comes, and he's, making his well wishes to the congregation, and he comes to his place in the center of the cathedral. And then another astonishing moment is when Sir George, the biggest ego in the world, came down and kissed the Pope's ring.
Wow.
So it's a cool memory.
Wow,
Yeah.
Wow. Did you get a sense with sitting next to Bud, this, was there something different about his sound and that whole projection thing? Did you notice anything? Probably a lot of energy, I'm sure.
I really think that the focal point was at the audience, because it didn't sound diffuse or anything, but I don't think I heard as much the focal point of the sound sitting right beside him.
Got it.
Yeah.
So he was throwing it out into the audience.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Those are experiences you don't forget.
Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to share them with us.
Well, thanks for asking.
No, it's my pleasure. I think I mentioned at the top of the episode that when I came into school, Tim and Dave Ferguson and Stephen Wilson, these were the hot cats in town, and it was always great to hear you guys play. So, Puddles has instructed me to present you as a token of our appreciation with an image of himself. He's so self-centered. This is a genuine University of Oregon beverage dispenser. We hope you'll use it in good health.
I'll probably use it tonight.
Our best wishes. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And now back to you. Tim, I was reading your bio on the St. Louis Symphony webpage, and it said something about the St. Louis Low Brass Collective.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering if you can elaborate that sounds very interesting.
About 6, 7 years ago, my colleague in the orchestra, bass trombonist Jerry Pagano,
Sure.
was teaching at the University of Missouri at St. Louis. Had, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9 students. I don't know how many he had. And he just started having monthly events for the students. Most of them had not come from very rich backgrounds, and so he would ask local folks to come and just give a class in an evening, or play, or just do something. And I did a class at one point, and then the trombone quartet in the orchestra would, maybe play a concert. And he just called it St. Louis Low Brass Collective, and it was his thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it for a couple of years, and then he started saying, wow, this is getting really hard. And I said, well, if it's a good thing, maybe it's good enough to have organizational support. Maybe it should become an organization. So I kind of got involved and initiated becoming a nonprofit. And we got a board together, and so this may be the 6th year of its existence as an organization. And the organization, I like to call it a service organization. Some folks here, St. Louis Low Brass Collective. Oh, is that a band? And no, not really. No. So we put on events. At least once a year, we'll bring in somebody from out of town.
Mm-hmm.
Last year we brought in Carol Yonch.
Oh, great.
Principal tuba in the Philly Orchestra.
Yeah.
And we brought in Jim Pugh last year.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. And the other thing we've started to do now, this would be I think we've got 4 of them, 3 or 4 of them done. We make a commission every year. We have a kind of a gala concert once a year where all the best players in the St. Louis get together, and we play stuff. And so the instrumentation that we've sort of hit on kind of accidentally is 4 trombones, 2 euphoniums, 2 tubas. So all the pieces that we've had have had that combination of low brass instruments, plus maybe percussion or 2, depending on what the composer wants to do. And we've got some good pieces out of that, actually. Other events will be just people come and we'll read ensemble music, and we'll pick from the board members. The board members are all low brass people. They're all the leading low brass people in town. Tom Vinson, who's the principal trombone at the Muni Orchestra, which is a big deal in St. Louis and plays at the Fox Theater. And Brett Stamps, jazz trombonist, just retired from Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. All these folks are in one way or another leaders in the brass section world. Not necessarily all professionals, but in some way associated with low brass and in some way leaders.
Oh, that sounds like a great project. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.